G'day guys, Solid here and welcome back to another episode of Adventure News. We've got a crap ton of stuff to get through as we get closer to the end of the year. We've got Honda's updated 2024 Africa Twin in the news, MV Agusta's Lucky Explorer 5.5 and 9.5, BMW have just dropped the F900Gs, CANAM are set to release an electric dual sport, and lastly, new details have been released on Royal Enfield's 450 Himalayan. So let's just dive straight into the details. Let's start with the big and very popular Africa Twin, which looks to be getting some significant updates for 2024. Thanks to some filings at the Swiss Federal Road Office, we were able to get some details on what the Honda 2024 Africa Twin has in store for us. And I guess the biggest part of the story is a bump in power figures. Peak horsepower will still be roughly 102 horsepower, but importantly, it looks like we're getting a nice bump in torque out of the Africa Twin. So how much more torque exactly? Well, the old model had 105 Newton meters of torque. The 2024 model is reported to be getting 112 Newton meters of torque, almost a bump in 10 Newton meters of torque, which will be very nice to have on tap, especially when you think of other major flagship adventure bikes are making significantly more power these days. But the good news on the torque doesn't stop there, because it also comes in lower in the rev range, which is also really important when you're riding off-road, because you want that lumpy, torquey characteristic down low, or as low as you can get it. That makes it a much better experience, particularly in the slow speed stuff off-road. With the outgoing model, the torque came in at roughly 6,250 RPM. Honda have brought that down. Peak torque now kicks in at 5,500 RPM, significantly earlier in the rev range. The other major difference that's reported with this 2024 Africa Twin is a change in wheel size. So currently the Africa Twins has an 18/21 wheel setup, which we all know is the best for off-road. But Honda have chosen to slap a 19-inch front wheel on the Africa Twin, which is a really interesting decision because that certainly makes it more road focused than dirt focused. So they're kind of doing a 180 here, heading back towards more on-road comfort and performance. And for those of you worried that this is going to be a downgrade towards off-road performance, apparently the Africa Twin Adventure Sports model is going to be keeping the 21/18 wheel setup. So it makes sense that Honda could potentially separate these bikes a little bit more, offering a more road-focused Africa Twin and a more off-road focused Africa Twin. That's how a lot of manufacturers do it. The Africa Twin also puts on some weight, disappointingly, only 3 kilograms, but it still is some weight. Now, we don't know why that is. It's probably technology upgrades like cameras, rear radars, and adaptive cruise control. That kind of stuff is probably going to be added to this to keep it competitive, because all the other big flagship adventure bikes are getting all this technology as we speak. Apparently Honda will be showcasing this at the big international motorcycle show at the end of the year, so we really don't have that long to wait. I've been following the MV Agusta, particularly the Lucky Explorer 5.5, fairly closely, and I brought you a story. Stefan Pierre said that he really didn't think the 5.5 was a viable option. And I pointed out why that was a big deal, because the Pierre Mobility groups that owns KTM, GasGas and Husqvarna have bought a 25% stake in MV Agusta. So what they say now holds a lot of weight. Started to get me worried. Now we've got further reports now that MV Agusta themselves have stated they put the 5.5 on a temporary hold, and they're not going to be releasing it alongside the 9.5 like was originally planned. I think this is the first indication that MV Agusta are actually listening to Stefan Pierre and the Pierre Mobility Group. The other thing that lends credence to MV Agusta really paying attention to what the Pierre Mobility Group actually say at the board meetings is the fact that they're changing the name of the Lucky Explorer 9.5. The Lucky Explorer 9.5 will now be renamed as the Enduro Veloce, but it's believed that they're moving away from that Lucky Explorer name because KTM do not want any association with Lucky Strike, the cigarette company. So that is another justification that MV Agusta really are paying attention to what KTM are saying, because they're changing the name of their flagship adventure bike based on what KTM have said. That is why I believe that the Lucky Explorer 5.5 is likely going to die a slow death. Now, am I disappointed? Not particularly. I was really disappointed with MV Agusta. They went the easy route with that Lucky Explorer 5.5. Now, if you don't pay attention to adventure bikes, it's a Chinese adventure bike. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing in itself. It's basically a Benelli TRK 502 with some different aesthetics. You can get yourself already a Lucky Explorer 5.5 for cheaper than what MV Agusta probably would have charged you anyway. The thing I have against this 500cc adventure bike is that it's quite heavy. You can get stuff far lighter with similar or better performance in that market. So I really didn't think it was a competitive adventure bike to start with. Now, it does have a small niche in that those people that want a fairly decent road presence with a good amount of weight, so in crosswinds and highway riding, it is stable. Most of us lean towards wanting lighter weight with our smaller adventure bikes. That's the big advantage of going smaller, and that's what this bike didn't have. So for me, it was always a little bit of a disappointment, and I hold out hope that MV Agusta might think through this whole process, and if the 9.5 really does well, maybe they'll make their own in-house smaller displacement adventure bike. But I'd love to know your thoughts on this whole saga. Now let's dive into the BMW F900Gs, which has some significant and major updates, which actually are really encouraging to see. And this is going to make it quite a formidable middleweight. Now for me personally, when they went to the 850GS, put on some weight, it lost some off-road capability, and I kind of forgot about it. The original F800 and the F700, which I personally owned, I absolutely loved that first model. The weight balance was great. It was only a little bit over 200 kilos. It was a very popular machine, the 800 series, but the 850, I kind of felt like they took a bit of a misstep. But BMW have obviously paid attention here. With that bump in engine capacity to 900 cc's, that means more power. So we're going from 95 horsepower, now we're going to 105 horsepower, which if you're paying attention to, is more power than the Africa Twin makes. Now, unfortunately, torque increase isn't as impressive. We only get a mild bump in torque. So we go from 67.9 foot-pound of torque to 68.6. Now, to ease our concerns, BMW is saying it has a much fuller torque curve, but that sounds to me like a whole lot of marketing wank. The proof will be in the pudding when you hop on the bike and see for yourself. Now, more important to me than those bump and power figures is the weight reduction. This is really impressive from BMW, and I wish more manufacturers would do this when they release a new model, that they take weight off rather than putting weight on, which really frustrates me. The F900Gs weighs 14 kilos less than the 850, which is really, really impressive. One of the major changes is it now has a plastic fuel tank, which is 14.5 litres. The rider triangle has apparently been improved for off-road riding. Now, the other big update is the suspension. We're now getting fully adjustable shower forks that have been completely updated. So we're now looking at 230mm of travel up front and 215mm of travel at the back. BMW are also offering an X-Works Enduro package, which is a long way of saying shiny stuff to make the bike more off-road capable. The most notable change is even shinier suspension. It's still shower suspension, but there's a few minor tweaks to make it even more off-road capable. Now, we could get bogged down in all the electronics, but really, who cares at this point? We all know it's going to get all the shiny electronics. And the low-key great thing about the F800GS is that it gets a bump in power as well. So we're going from 77 horsepower to 87 horsepower. You're also getting an almost 10 Newton meter bump in torque, jacked up to 91 Newton meters of torque. So that is also fantastic to see. My original F700GS, you always wanted a little bit more power, particularly on the road where you're likely to be using it most. Now you can see all three models here. We've got the road going version, which is now the F800GS, just for maximum confusion. Then we've of course got the F900GS Adventure, which we all know as the beefed up long distance version with the bigger fuel tank, crash bars and all the shinies bolted to it. And interestingly, the F900GS, which is the most off-road focused version, looks a lot different to the F800GS and the F900GS Adventure. Both those bikes keep that classic BMW headlight, but the F900GS definitely stands out at looking completely different. So I'd love to know what you guys think, particularly of the F900GS. Do you think they should have stuck with the same headlight on all three models, or do you like this refresh and update and different take? Chuck your thoughts down below. CANAM have released some teaser pictures and video of their electric dual sport model that they are set to be released. Now, we don't have any specifications. Now, importantly, we can see from those pictures that it looks like it has the much needed 21-inch, 18-inch wheel setup for off-road capability. But the real question, and we don't know, is how will this go off-road? What's it going to weigh with all those batteries on it? And how far are you going to be able to get? Because those are the two major limitations to electric motorcycles in the off-road setting. It's fine if it's an electric MX or enduro bike where you're doing shorter rides and you can keep it very light because you don't need much range. The challenge becomes with adventure and dual sports is we tend to ride a long way far away from civilization, so there's nowhere to charge the things. And if you want to ride long distances, you need a bike that can do those long distances. And with the current battery technology, it's just not quite there. We will probably get there, and it will be fantastic when we do, because think of all the things that a battery streamline with servicing and maintenance on the motorcycle. It could reduce a lot of the things that go wrong with an internal combustion engine. But at the moment, to get the range you need to be able to do adventures and dual sport riding means that the weight of the bike is just ridiculous. It'll be interesting to see whether CANAM have solved that problem and we have enough range but it's still light enough, because technology is developing very quickly. But I still don't think we're quite there yet. But I'd love to know your thoughts. How do you feel about electric motorcycles coming into the off-road world? Are you looking forward to it, or will you be hanging on to your internal combustion engine?
Start it up.
Now, we have an interesting report coming out of India from BikeWall talking about the potential for a 650 single-cylinder motard from Ducati. So we've got spy shots of this bike being test ridden in India, and the engine does indeed look like it is a single cylinder, and it looks like it is a significantly smaller capacity than the current 937cc model at the moment. So speculation is that this is a small displacement single cylinder model that will roughly be 650 cc's, with a target power range of somewhere around 75 horsepower. This is interesting for two reasons. The first is that Ducati haven't made a single cylinder since about 1993. The second thing is the bike that it's going up against. This is arguably aimed directly at KTM's 690 SMC-R. And what's important about the KTM 690 Super Motard? Well, it's a modular platform. So you've got the 690 Enduro, the Motard, and the road-going versions as well, based all off the same engine and rough chassis platform. My thought is, why wouldn't Ducati do the same thing and capitalize on that motor and chassis and make multiple models? So my hope is, and we've got no evidence whatsoever, it's just where my brain always goes, is that we could potentially see down the line Ducati look at how well KTM are doing with the 690 Enduro R and think to themselves, why don't we put that 650 single with this platform to good use and give some really good competition to the 690 Enduro? I would absolutely love to see that. How would you feel about a 650 single from Ducati to go directly against the 690 Enduro from KTM? Now, to continue my theory of Royal Enfield being the leakiest organisation in the motorcycle world, the homologation details of the Royal Enfield 450 have leaked. So we're able to get our hands on some information of the Royal Enfield 450, and they're really interesting details. Now, this still isn't confirmation from Royal Enfield themselves, but this is a fairly good indication of what we should expect. And the first one is the name. It's actually called the Royal Enfield Himalayan 452 in the documentation, which is very interesting. Now, that could potentially be the name that Royal Enfield go with rather than the 450, because the Himalayan, rather than going with the Himalayan 400, they went with the 411, so it makes sense that they would go with the 452. It sticks with their kind of naming style that they've used for the Himalayan so far. But the big question is that single cylinder, first liquid cooled single cylinder, going to make that claimed 40 horsepower? And if this documentation is true, that answer is basically yes, at 39.5 horsepower, which I think is a very respectable number for the size of the motor. It's significantly more power over the outgoing 411 model, which was 24.5 horsepower, and does show that some of the specifications that were claimed early on with this bike do seem to be coming true. Now the torque figures aren't in the documentation, so that claim of over 40 Newton meters of torque still remains to be seen. I'll be very interested to see whether that is true. Peak horsepower is about 8,000 RPM, so that's really quite revvy and high in the rev range. The bike's dimensions were also released in the documentation, but that really isn't too important in my opinion. The GVW is listed at 394 kilos, so people are losing their minds thinking that the bike is going to be weighing 394 kilos. But GVW is basically another acronym, gross vehicle weight. So that's how much weight the vehicle can bear. That's its maximum capacity. All up, the Royal Enfield Himalayan 452 can carry 394 kilos, including the weight of the bike itself, fully fueled and with 2 passengers and accessories on board. So don't get too concerned about the weight listed here. Now, the actual weight of the bike isn't listed. I've seen some rumors of just over 200 kilos. If that's the case, I'm just going to say it, I will be disappointed. I would really like to see this bike be significantly under 200 kilos. I think if they really head towards KTM 390 weight or even below that, this bike will be a massive hit. It will still be very popular regardless of the weight. But if they manage to keep the weight significantly down for proper off-road use, this bike could go to the stratosphere with popularity because it has that 450cc single-cylinder liquid-cooled motor, making the power figures that people want to see at 40 horsepower and over 40 Newton meters of torque. So if they can keep that weight down, this really could have unicorn status. Now the suspension really is a moot point because you can always upgrade that yourself. Am I confident that that's going to happen? Not really. Royal Enfield are a value-orientated manufacturer. They're not really a specialist at making lightweight off-road motorcycles. I think this will be on the heavier side, but time will tell. I could be wrong. I really hope I am. I'd love to know your thoughts on the matter. Basically, we only have to wait another month to find out all the details from Royal Enfield themselves, so very exciting times. Hit that like button if you liked the video, and as always, guys, don't forget to stay shiny side up, and I'll see you in the next one.